Welcome in, everyone. It's really great to have you with us today, whether you're, prepping for a big meeting or maybe catching up on some personal development, or if you just have this insatiable curiosity about how the people around you actually function day to day. You are definitely in the right place.
Yeah, absolutely.
We are talking directly to you, the learner. You're the kind of person who wants to extract the absolute maximum value out of all the information floating around out there. Yeah. And you want to do it without getting bogged down in the noise.
Right. Getting straight to the core of it.
Exactly. So today's deep dive is a really close look at the invisible architecture of our daily lives. We've got a fantastic source stack today. Specifically, we're looking at a conversational transcript that details the highly contrasting daily routines of two professionals. We've got Emma and John.
Two very different people.
Very different. And our mission here is to pull apart how these different rhythms function. We're looking at from the incredibly meticulous to the delightfully chaotic.
Chaos is definitely the right word for some of this.
It really is. So we want to extract those aha insights that you can actively use to design a day that brings you, contentment, energy, and maybe a little less friction. Okay, let's unpack this.
It's a really rich subject to dig into. Daily routines, they often get dismissed as just schedules, right? Or just lists of chores. But they are so much more than that.
Oh, for sure.
They're these highly personal, almost intimate expressions of how we manage our physical and cognitive energy. When we look at the source material detailing how Emma and John navigate their days, we're really looking at two entirely different philosophies of living.
Completely opposite philosophy.
Yeah, and they are both applying these philosophies to a modern work-from-home scenario, which really makes it a perfect laboratory for examining human behavior. We get to see exactly how they build their own structures when that traditional office structure is just stripped away.
And the contrast is really what makes this so compelling. You've got Emma, who is, she is the epitome of the structured, disciplined early bird. Everything has its place.
Everything.
And then you have John. He's creative, decidedly chaotic, a confessed snooze button-loving night owl, and as the source material reveals pretty quickly, a man prone to some pretty hilarious minor disasters.
Minor disasters is a generous way to put it.
Right. So I want to start right at the friction point, the actual moment they wake up. We learn that Emma wakes up strictly at 6:30 a.m. She calls it the crack of dawn, and she is up on the dot.
No hesitation.
None. She immediately rehydrates with a large glass of water and heads straight out for a brisk 15-minute walk. But John, meanwhile, his phone alarm is set for 7:30 a.m., but he doesn't get out of bed.
Not even close.
He engages in what he actually describes as a small, personal battle with the snooze button. He hits it at 7:30, again at 7:40, and finally drags himself up at 7:50 a.m.
What's fascinating here is how they manage the psychology of the wake-up transition. Because waking up isn't just opening your eyes, it's a systemic neurological shift. You're moving from an unconscious state of rest to a conscious state of demand.
And they handle that shift completely differently.
Exactly. Emma is utilizing immediate environmental cues to force that transition. Drinking a large glass of water right away, that kickstarts her metabolism. It hydrates tissues that have been losing moisture for hours. But the real heavy lifting there is that brisk 15-minute walk.
Right, because she's getting out into the fresh air, into what she calls the tranquil streets, to center herself.
Yeah, from a physiological standpoint, she is exposing her retina to early morning light. That halts the brain's production of melatonin and firmly signals to her circadian rhythm that the day has officially begun.
It's like flipping a switch.
Very much so. And the rhythmic bilateral motion of walking, that also helps process any lingering sleep inertia or morning anxiety. She finds the stillness of 6:30 a.m. centering because she is proactively stepping into the day on her own terms before the world can make demands on her.
But then you look at John's approach, and I really have to question his logic here. He knows he has this terrible habit with the snooze button, but he completely defends it with this mathematically calculated procrastination.
Oh, the math.
Yes, the math. The source material notes he goes to bed at 11:30 p.m., so he rationalizes that by battling the snooze button until exactly 7:50 a.m., he is ensuring he hits exactly 8 hours of sleep.
He genuinely views this as a perfectly calculated strategy.
He really does. But isn't snoozing for 20 minutes just objectively terrible for your sleep architecture?
Physiologically, yes, absolutely. It's highly inefficient. When that first alarm goes off at 7:30, he is yanked out of whatever sleep state she was in.
Right.
Hitting snooze doesn't plunge him back into deep, restorative, slow-wave sleep or REM. It puts him in this shallow, fragmented state. His brain is essentially caught in a neurological limbo between waking and sleeping for 20 solid minutes.
So his math is just flawed. He's not getting 8 hours of quality sleep. He's getting 7 hours and 40 minutes of sleep, plus 20 minutes of self-inflicted torture.
That is the logical perspective, yeah. But we have to look at the psychological mechanism at play here. John admits he is deeply attached to the warmth of his duvet. Right, that attachment is a very common human struggle against the demands of the day. The duvet represents an absolute barrier against responsibility. When his phone alarm rings, it's an intrusion. It is the outside world knocking.
He doesn't want to answer the door.
Exactly. By hitting snooze, he's not trying to optimize his sleep cycles. He's trying to reclaim autonomy over his morning, even if he's only negotiating it in 10-minute increments. Emma embraces the transition by moving into it. John negotiates with it from a highly defensive position.
Which brings up a question for you listening right now. What does your morning protocol look like? Are you stepping out into the fresh air like Emma, letting the quiet environment center you?
Getting that melatonin to drop.
Right. Or are you fighting that defensive battle like John, clinging to the last shreds of warmth before you have to face the music? Because those two approaches set drastically different tones for the day. Emma's morning is defined by proactive movement. John's morning starts with a literal, digitized feud with his phone.
And that tone bleeds directly into how they behave in the next hour of their lives, particularly when it comes to how they choose to fuel themselves.
Oh, the breakfast contrast is brilliant. Emma's breakfast is incredibly utilitarian. She has a single banana and what she calls her essential coffee.
Just the bare minimum.
Yeah, John even comments on this in the transcript. He tells her she's going to be running on fumes by mid-morning. And she actually admits she feels a little peckish, but she just relies on the caffeine to work its magic.
It's a very functional approach.
It is.
Yeah.
But then John goes in the complete opposite direction. He crafts what he proudly calls a spectacular feast. We're talking perfectly scrambled eggs, sourdough toast, freshly squeezed orange juice.
If we evaluate this through the lens of cognitive load and energy management, Emma is optimizing for speed and immediate spark. She doesn't want to spend cognitive resources on preparing a meal.
Right, she wants to get straight to work.
And she doesn't want her body diverting massive amounts of energy to digest a heavy breakfast either. A banana provides readily available simple carbohydrates, and the caffeine is a direct central nervous system stimulant. She's essentially bypassing the physical grounding of a meal to jump straight into a high-functioning cognitive state.
But John is doing the exact opposite. He is leaning heavily into the physical experience.
He is. And I would argue that for someone whose morning starts with that stressful, fragmented 20-minute battle with the alarm, he actually needs that grounding ritual.
Oh, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, the tactile experience of cracking eggs, the auditory feedback of the sizzling pan, the smell of the sourdough toasting. These are highly engaging sensory inputs. They pull his brain out of that groggy, resistant sleep inertia and force him to be present in the physical world. Preparing a complex breakfast is a mindfulness exercise for him.
It's a great theory. But his mindfulness exercise doesn't quite go according to plan on this particular morning. Because of his cat, Toby.
Yes, Toby.
John describes Toby as his four-legged alarm clock who is perpetually famished. But on this specific morning, Toby isn't waking John up. John comes into the kitchen, looks under the table, checks behind the sofa. He can't find him anywhere.
Which is suspicious for a hungry cat.
Highly suspicious. He finally notices the pantry door is nudged ajar. Here's where it gets really interesting. Kobe is sitting directly next to the bag of cat food inside the pantry, just staring at John as if to say, "You were late, so I'm cutting out the middleman."
Toby is the perfect embodiment of entropy in a schedule.
Entropy is a good word for a cat.
It really is. You can engineer your morning down to the minute, whether you're doing Emma's hyper-efficient banana routine or John's grounding sourdough ritual, but you cannot engineer a hungry animal.
No, you definitely can't.
Toby didn't just passively wait to be fed. He learned the physical layout of the environment, identified the weak point, which was the slightly unlatched pantry door, and bypassed the human bottleneck entirely.
It makes you realize how much of our daily routine is dictated by non-human actors. We think we're designing our days, but Toby's biological clock is essentially dictating John's workflow.
Precisely.
John can't sit down and enjoy his spectacular eggs until he handles the cat situation.
It really highlights the illusion of total control. Our routines exist within an ecosystem. partners, children, pets, even the delivery driver ringing the doorbell. They all introduce variability.
And Emma avoids that variability.
Yes, Emma minimizes variability by leaving the house entirely for her walk. John stays inside, where the variables live, and therefore he has to adapt to them.
So after the breakfasts are eaten and the cat is appeased, both of them sit down to work. And since they both work predominantly from home, this brings us to the psychology of the workspace. This is where the friction between their two styles becomes really evident.
It's a stark contrast.
Extremely. Emma states flat out that before she can even fire up her laptop, she has to establish order. She washes her breakfast dishes, does a quick tidy up of her space, makes her bed. She says she finds it physically impossible to concentrate if her environment is chaotic.
And John?
John works in a state of what the transcript calls complete disarray. His desk is just a landscape of stray pens, crinkled papers, and multiple half-empty coffee mugs.
We are looking at two entirely different configurations of executive function here. For a profile like Emma's, visual clutter is not just background noise. It is actively processed as cognitive clutter.
How so?
Well, when she looks at a dirty breakfast dish or an unmade bed, her brain registers them as incomplete tasks. In psychology, we refer to these as open loops. The Zeigarnik effect dictates that people remember uncompleted or interrupted tasks better than completed ones.
Oh, wow. So the unmade bed is literally draining her mental bandwidth while she's trying to read an email.
Precisely. Every open loop demands a fraction of her attention. By washing the dishes and making bed, she is closing those loops. She is clearing her working memory so that when she sits down at her laptop, 100% of her cognitive resources can be allocated to her professional work.
So the pristine space is a prerequisite for her focus.
Yes, it's mandatory for her.
I understand that entirely. I think a lot of people operate that way. But how on earth does John function? Emma actually tells him in the transcript that he needs to get his act together.
And what's his defense?
John says he tries, but he just gets completely engrossed in his work and forgets. He sits in this graveyard of half-empty coffee mugs, answers a few emails, and then just dives into a 3 or 4 hour, highly immersive creative process, drafting stories, planning out projects. How is his brain not short-circuiting from all the open loops on his desk?
I would suggest that for John, the chaos isn't a distraction. It's actually a byproduct of a very specific type of flow state. His brain heavily prioritizes the creative, generative task at the expense of spatial awareness.
So he just doesn't see the mess.
Right. He has an incredibly high threshold for visual noise. The mugs and the pens aren't registering as open loops because his cognitive filter is intensely narrow when he's drafting stories. The external world simply drops away.
You're making him sound like a creative genius, but I have to wonder if the creative chaos is just a convenient excuse for poor executive function.
That's a very fair critique.
I mean, he's highly productive in his specific tasks, sure, but he's also leaving a trail of wreckage behind him.
There definitely is a romanticization of the messy creative, and sometimes it really is just an inability to organize. But the source material indicates he is successfully drafting material for hours at a time.
That's true.
And that level of sustained attention requires formidable executive function. It's just applied differently. He applies it to the abstract task rather than the physical environment.
I would love to run an experiment where they have to switch desks for a day. Just imagine Emma sitting down at John's desk.
Oh, she'd be paralyzed.
Completely. The sticky coffee rings, the chaotic piles of paper. I genuinely think she would freeze. She'd probably spend the first 3 hours organizing his pens by color before she could even look at her screen.
And conversely, if you place John at Emma's utterly sterile, minimalist desk, he might find it creatively paralyzing.
Really? A clean desk would paralyze him.
For some people who thrive in disarray, the visual noise actually acts as a form of stimulation that keeps the brain engaged. A completely blank desk might understimulate him, making it harder to initiate that creative process. It proves that an optimized workspace is highly subjective.
But John's habit of ignoring his physical surroundings does eventually catch up with him. And it leads to one of the funniest moments in the transcript.
The tea incident.
The tea incident. Because he's so deeply immersed in this flow state, he starts operating purely on autopilot. Right at 11 a.m., he takes a quick break, makes a fresh cup of tea, brings it back to the chaotic desk, and dives right back into his writing. He is completely in the zone.
High flow state.
Exactly. And a few minutes later, without taking his eyes off the screen, he reaches for his mug.
Yeah.
But because his desk is a disaster area, he grabs his pen pot by mistake. He brings a pot full of plastic stationery right up to his face.
This is a perfect case study in the mechanics of routine blindness.
Routine blindness.
Yes. When the prefrontal cortex, which is the part of the brain responsible for active conscious focus, when that is entirely hijacked by his writing, the brain delegates physical movements to the basal ganglia.
And what does the basal ganglia do?
The basal ganglia handles ingrained subconscious motor patterns. John's hand knows the rough spatial coordinates of where a mug is supposed to sit. So the basal ganglia executes a generic reach, grasp, and lift command. And it does this without demanding visual confirmation from the eyes.
He almost drank ink. He says he brought the pot right to his lips before he realized what was happening. And what's fascinating is that his eyes didn't catch the mistake. He didn't look down. It was his tactile senses that saved him.
Yes, the sensory feedback.
He specifically mentions feeling the plastic texture and a distinct lack of warmth.
That detail is crucial. It shows how our sensory systems act as tiered fail-safes. The visual system was occupied. The motor system executed a flawed command based on an assumption. The final line of defense was the thermal and tactile feedback loop.
So his lips and hands realized the mistake before his conscious brain did.
Exactly. The brain expected the warmth of ceramic and hot tea. When the sensory nerves in his hand and lips reported cold plastic, it created a massive cognitive dissonance. That unexpected sensory input bypassed his focus and sent an immediate interrupt signal to his prefrontal cortex. It snapped him out of the flow state just before disaster struck.
It's the dark side of being completely absorbed in your work. You become a danger to yourself.
You really do.
And to add insult to injury, Toby the cat, who caused all the morning drama, was fast asleep on the sofa the entire time, completely unaware that his owner was about to ingest a mouthful of ballpoint pens. The orchestrator of the chaos sleeps soundly while the human glitches out.
It's a humorous anecdote, but the underlying lesson is profound. If you are going to enter deep, visually consuming flow states, your physical environment needs to be predictable. John's chaotic desk finally betrayed him because he couldn't rely on the physical coordinates of his tools.
Which is probably why they both need a serious break by the time midday rolls around. This brings us to the midday reset and how they handle boundaries in a work-from-home setup. Both Emma and John opt for something quick and light for lunch. Emma has a salad or a sandwich, and John makes himself a simple ham and cheese sandwich.
Nothing too heavy.
Right. But the food isn't the important part here. The critical detail is where they eat. Neither of them stays at their desk.
And this is arguably one of the most important structural elements they've implemented. The work-from-home era essentially assassinated the geographical boundary.
Yes, the commute is gone.
Right. In a traditional office environment, you have built-in physical transitions. You walk to the break room, you go to the cafeteria, or you step out to a cafe. Your brain deeply associates those geographical shifts with context shifts.
So moving physically changes your mental state.
You move your body, and your mind understands that the work context is paused and the recovery context has begun. When your office is your living room or your bedroom, those natural boundaries vanish entirely.
Everything just bleeds together. I know you listening have probably done this. How many times have you eaten your lunch while staring at the exact same spreadsheet or email inbox you've been working on since 9 a.m.? Your brain never gets a break from the visual environment of your stress.
It's a recipe for burnout.
Emma has a great strategy for this. She says that if the weather permits, she takes her lunch out into the garden for 20 minutes. She explicitly calls it a great mental reset. And John makes a conscious effort to carry his ham and cheese sandwich over to his dining table. He talks about how important it is to take a proper break, to actively disengage.
The word disengage is exactly right. By walking out into her garden, Emma is forcing a massive sensory shift. The lighting changes from artificial to natural, the acoustic environment changes, the air temperature changes.
It's a total system reboot.
Exactly. This sensory shock acts as a cognitive partition, firmly dividing her day into distinct halves. John doesn't go outside, but moving to the dining table serves a similar function.
Because he's leaving the messy desk behind.
Right. By physically removing himself from the chaotic landscape of his desk and the lingering trauma of the pen pot incident, he signals to his brain that the immersive problem-solving phase is temporarily suspended. Without manufacturing these spatial boundaries, a remote workday becomes a single, exhausting, unpartitioned blur.
They're essentially recreating the water cooler moment just with themselves. And they need that hard reset because the afternoon demands a totally different kind of energy.
It always does.
After lunch, their schedules diverge significantly based on the types of tasks they need to accomplish. Emma's afternoons become highly social and collaborative. She schedules her online meetings with various teams to discuss new projects. She points out that this interaction helps break up the solitary, isolating nature of working from home.
And what about John?
John shifts gears entirely. He stops writing and moves to hands-on mechanical tasks, like recording audio or editing videos.
What we're observing here is an intuitive grasp of task batching aligned with circadian rhythms. Most people experience a dip in core body temperature and alertness in the early afternoon.
The classic post-lunch slump.
Yes, the slump. Emma likely recognizes that her peak capacity for deep, solitary, analytical thought, the kind of work that requires a pristine desk, is highest in the morning. So she batches her collaborative tasks for the afternoon. Meetings generally carry a lighter cognitive load because the social engagement and external stimuli help keep you alert.
That's a really smart way to manage your energy.
It is. And John uses a similar logic. Writing from scratch is a highly generative, demanding process. Video editing is more mechanical, it requires attention, but it's reactive rather than generative.
He's not staring at a blank page.
Right, he's manipulating existing material, which gives his creative faculties a rest.
It's incredibly smart to stop fighting your energy levels and just align your work types with whatever energy you actually have available. But no matter how well you batch your tasks, eventually the workday has to end. And this is where John does something I absolutely love.
Oh, his shutdown routine.
Yes. He aims to finish at 5 p.m., but he admits it often creeps closer to 6 p.m. When he finally does decide he's done, he ceremoniously shuts down his computer, stands up, and verbally declares out loud to the empty room, work is over.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, John's vocal declaration is doing the exact same job as the commute used to do.
Replacing the train ride.
Exactly. The physical commute, the drive home, it was a liminal space. It was the psychological bridge between your professional identity and your private identity. When you work from home, you don't have that liminal space. You close a laptop, and instantly you're supposed to be a relaxed partner or parent.
And your brain just can't switch tracks that fast.
No, that jarring transition is very difficult for the brain to process.
So by saying it out loud, he's creating a ritual to replace the commute.
Yes. A verbal declaration, combined with the physical act of shutting down the machine, serves as an artificial boundary. By vocalizing it, he externalizes the boundary. He forces his auditory system to hear the command. It's a deliberate psychological mechanism to signal the nervous system that it is safe to stand down.
It's like casting a spell to release himself from the obligations of the day. Work is over. I honestly think everyone listening should try this today. Just stand up in your kitchen or your home office, look your cat or your dog in the eye, and declare it. Because once that spell is cast, both Emma and John move into their evening decompression phases, and the split between how they recover is just as stark as how they wake up.
Active versus passive recovery.
Exactly. We're looking at active versus passive recovery. John heads straight to the gym. He hits the weights, he gets cardio in on the treadmill, and he says it melts away the residual stress and draws a firm line under his workday.
Physical exertion.
Right. And then, after cooking a heavy meal like pasta or grilled chicken, he spends his evening playing online multiplayer games. He refers to it as his modern-day social club.
John's evening protocol is a textbook example of active, high-intensity decompression. We often assume that relaxing means doing nothing. But for certain nervous systems, doing nothing is actually agitating.
Oh, really? So sitting on the couch would make him more stressed?
For him, yes. During a high-focus workday, the body accumulates cortisol and adrenaline, even if you're just sitting at a desk. John requires intense physical exertion to process and clear those stress hormones. He literally has to metabolize the stress of the day through heavy lifting and cardio.
And then he jumps into online gaming, which is hyper-stimulating. Flashing lights, fast reflexes, talking to people over a headset.
Because his workday is entirely solitary, he has a deficit of social interaction. He seeks out a highly engaging, stimulating environment to fulfill that need. The gaming requires just enough cognitive bandwidth to prevent his mind from wandering back to his work projects.
But it's a completely different kind of stress.
It's a different type of bandwidth. He's switching off his work brain by fully occupying his social and spatial brain.
Now contrast that with Emma. Emma relies entirely on passive, low-intensity recovery. She rolls out a mat and does gentle yoga in her living room. She takes her time cooking, making a hearty vegetable soup from scratch.
Very calming activities.
Yes, and after dinner, she avoids screens and high-stimulation environments completely. She reads dense books on ancient history, maybe watches a slow-paced documentary, and takes a hot bath. It is all engineered around quietude.
Emma is utilizing practices that actively stimulate the parasympathetic nervous system. That's the rest and digest network.
Lowering the heart rate.
Exactly. Gentle stretching, the warm water of a bath, the slow, methodical processing of reading a history book. These all serve to actively lower her heart rate and reduce her blood pressure. Where John needs to burn off his stress, Emma needs to cool hers down. She is methodically unwinding her physiology to prepare for her strict 10:30 p.m. bedtime.
I have to mention the banter they have about this in the transcript because it's so relatable. Emma suggests that John should try her yoga routine to help him unwind.
Oh, I can imagine his response.
John immediately shoots her down. He claims he has the flexibility of a plank of wood. He jokes that an episode of his life called John Attempts a Downward Dog would be a complete disaster. And Emma fires right back, saying she would pay good money to see that. It's funny, but it also shows how deeply entrenched they are in their physical identities.
And they are right to be entrenched. Recovery is not a universally applicable prescription.
It's not one size fits all.
Not at all. If you forced John to sit in a quiet room and do gentle stretching, his unspent physical energy would likely cause him to ruminate on his work. It would increase his agitation.
He would be thinking about the emails he didn't send.
Right. Conversely, if you force Emma onto a treadmill or into a frantic multiplayer video game at 8 p.m., it would flood her system with cortisol and completely derail her ability to sleep at 10:30. They have optimized their recovery protocols for their specific neurological and physiological baselines.
But even with a perfectly optimized recovery protocol, things can still go wildly off the rails when you push yourself to the limit. Which brings us to John's final and arguably most spectacular blunder of the day.
Here we go.
We already talked about the near miss with the pen pot in the morning, but it's late at night. John is finally winding down. He goes into his bathroom to get ready for bed. He grabs a tube, squeezes a healthy amount onto his toothbrush, and starts brushing. Immediately, he realizes something is catastrophically wrong.
A sensory shock.
He describes the taste as bizarre, highly perfumed, and aggressively floral.
It's the ultimate manifestation of a depleted cognitive battery.
He brushes his teeth with hand cream. He's standing there, squinting at the tube, and realizes, to his absolute horror, that he grabbed his floral hand cream instead of his toothpaste because both items were packaged in very similar white tubes. He had to spend 10 solid minutes violently rinsing this vile, soapy perfume flavor out of his mouth.
This circles us right back to the autopilot discussion we had regarding the pen pot, but the underlying cause is different.
Oh, so?
In the morning, his autopilot was triggered by being in a state of hyper-focused flow. At night, the autopilot is triggered by sheer exhaustion. John tells us he stays up until 11:30 p.m. By that time, his prefrontal cortex is effectively offline. Decision fatigue has maxed out, so the brain relies on heuristics.
Simple mental shortcuts.
Exactly. It uses heuristics to save whatever tiny amount of energy it has left.
And his heuristic was incredibly basic. White tube in the bathroom equals toothpaste.
Precisely. The visual discernment required to actually read the label was deemed too energetically expensive by his tired brain. The heuristic failed spectacularly. But what is most instructive here is how John handles the aftermath.
He doesn't just promise to do better.
Right. He doesn't vow to try harder or pay more attention next time. He recognizes that willpower and attention are unreliable resources when you are exhausted.
He changes the environment. He states that he now strictly separates the items. The hand cream lives exclusively in the bedroom, and the toothpaste remains in the bathroom. He instituted a hard rule of no cross-contamination.
That is a masterclass in behavioral design. If you know a system is prone to failure, in this case, his tired brain interpreting white tubes, you don't rely on the flawed system to fix itself. You change the physical environment to make the error impossible. You remove the decision entirely.
It's such a practical takeaway, hidden inside a ridiculous story. Stop relying on your willpower when you know you're going to be tired. Rely on geography. Keep the hand cream out of the bathroom entirely. Make the mistake physically impossible.
Save yourself from yourself.
Exactly. So after surviving the floral toothpaste ordeal, John finally gets into bed at 11:30 p.m. And if you look back at his morning math, because he battles that snooze button until exactly 7:50 a.m., he technically achieves his goal of 8 hours in bed. Emma, maintaining her pristine structure, is asleep by 10:30 p.m. and wakes up effortlessly at 6:30 a.m.
Both getting their 8 hours.
Despite taking completely divergent paths, navigating totally different obstacles, and utilizing entirely different forms of energy, they both arrive at the exact same destination: 8 hours of rest.
And that rest is the foundational reset that allows them to boot up their respective operating systems and run the entire routine again the next day.
So, bringing all of this together, we've journeyed from Emma's tranquil 6:30 a.m. streets to John's floral-tasting midnight panic. The core insight we have to extract from this material is that the search for the single correct daily routine is a fool's errand.
There is no perfect routine.
Emma thrives on meticulous order, early morning hydration, visual minimalism, and parasympathetic recovery. John thrives on creative immersion, heavy grounding meals, intense physical exertion, and managing his chaos. The ultimate goal isn't to mimic a billionaire's morning routine or copy someone else's schedule. The goal is to cultivate a rhythm that accurately reflects your own neurology, bringing you personal contentment and sustained energy.
Emma and John are a study in self-awareness. They don't apologize for how they operate. Emma doesn't try to force herself to stay up late, and John doesn't try to force himself to enjoy a minimalist desk.
They accept who they are.
They've audited their own natural inclinations and built supportive scaffolding around them, whether that's needing absolute visual silence to read an email or needing the chaotic energy of a messy desk to dive into a creative flow state.
Which brings us right back to you, the learner. There's a great prompt in the source material that asks, how simple or detailed is your personal story? Start with the basics. I wake up, I eat, I work, I relax.
It's a powerful exercise.
Take a hard look at your own narrative tomorrow. Where are your friction points? Do you need to manufacture better geographical boundaries for your lunch? Do you need to verbally declare work is over to transition into your evening? Or do you just need to move your hand cream into the bedroom?
It raises an incredibly interesting line of inquiry, and it's the thought I'd like to leave you with today. If our daily routines are, as we said, the invisible architecture of our personalities, what would happen if you intentionally inhabited someone else's architecture for just one day?
I love that idea. A routine swap.
Exactly. If you are naturally an Emma, highly structured, quiet, preferring low-intensity evenings, what could you learn about yourself by immersing yourself in a chaotic, highly social, high-intensity gaming session?
You might discover a whole new side of yourself.
And if you are a John, a late-night creative who views the alarm clock as an enemy, what profound thoughts might you discover if you forced yourself out into the tranquil 6:30 a.m. air with a simple glass of water? Routines build grooves in our brains, and sometimes those grooves become ruts. Try stepping into a completely different rhythm tomorrow, even just for 1 hour. You might just discover a new gear in your own cognitive engine.
That is a brilliant challenge. Break your own mold for an hour and see what happens. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We hope you picked up some practical tools and psychological insights to help you navigate your own invisible architecture. Keep exploring the material, keep questioning your own habits, and keep fine-tuning the rhythms that make your life work. Catch you next time.